Look who just broke the code without even trying, who wandered into the forbidden corners of reality and accidentally read the book that was never meant to exist. Hello, you beautiful accident of consciousness, you unauthorized thinker. You glitch in their perfectly controlled narrative. Something shifted, didn't it? You were just sitting there, maybe at work, maybe in class, maybe alone at 3 o'clock in the morning when your mind should have been asleep. And suddenly, you connected dots that were never meant to be connected. You saw a pattern that was supposed to stay invisible. You asked a question that made the room go silent. And now they're watching you differently. The professors, the experts, the ones with the polished credentials and endless certifications. They look at you like you've just performed a trick that shouldn't be possible, like you solved a puzzle using pieces from a completely different box. Do you know what you did? You used logic without permission. You thought without a license. You reasoned your way toward a conclusion that their entire system depends on you never reaching. And the most beautiful, terrifying part? You didn't even realize you were doing it. In that moment, your brain, the magnificent rebel behind your eyes, did something they've spent centuries trying to prevent. It recognized a pattern that crosses disciplines, bridges the gaps they've carefully maintained, and connects the dots they've worked so hard to keep apart. Maybe you saw something in mathematics that mirrored biology. Maybe history echoed patterns in economics. Maybe psychology revealed the same mechanics used in marketing, politics, and education. The walls between subjects were never meant to organize knowledge. They were built to stop you from seeing the whole picture. They compartmentalized everything for a reason. They put knowledge in boxes, locked those boxes in separate rooms, and told you that specialization was the path to wisdom. But your mind walked through those walls as if they were paper. You cross-referenced without authorization, synthesized without supervision, and now you're holding a fragment of truth they never wanted assembled. Not because it's dangerous to the world, but because it's dangerous to the illusion. The illusion that complexity needs their translation. The illusion that understanding requires their permission. The illusion that wisdom flows only from their institutions, like water from a tap they control. And now, watch what happens next. This is where it gets interesting. First comes the dismissal. That's not how it works, they'll say, offering no explanation. You're oversimplifying, they'll claim, while drowning the simple in needless complication. You need more education to understand, they'll insist, knowing that more education just means deeper indoctrination into not seeing what you've seen. Then comes the discrediting. They'll find one tiny flaw in your reasoning, something trivial, and magnify it until it supposedly destroys everything you've said. They'll question your credentials, your sources, even your right to think beyond your assigned level. They'll throw words like amateur, conspiracy theorist, and dangerous misunderstanding at you. But here's what they're really doing. They're panicking. Beneath their polished confidence and authoritative corrections, they're scrambling because you just exposed their monopoly on understanding as an illusion. You've proven that a curious mind driven by genuine intent can cut through decades of carefully manufactured confusion. They spent years in institutions, drowning in debt and degrees, memorizing the sanctioned interpretations, mastering the approved questions, and parroting the authorized answers. And you, without credentials, without permission, walked in with raw, unfiltered logic and made their entire framework tremble. Not because you're smarter, but because you're not invested in protecting the mystery. Let's be honest about who these so-called keepers of knowledge really are. They're not the enlightened sages they pretend to be. They're gatekeepers, toll collectors on the bridge to understanding. Their entire identity is built around being the intermediaries, the interpreters, the indispensable translators between you and truth. They've created languages within languages, filled with terminology designed to exclude and jargon meant to intimidate. They've built labyrinths where straight paths would do, introduced complications wherever simplicity threatens their authority. Every field has them. these priestly guardians of unnecessary complexity. In science, they'll insist you can't understand without years of training, yet it's the child's innocent question that shakes their foundations. In philosophy, they bury clarity beneath endless citations and references, while true wisdom often comes from those who've never opened a single approved book. In economics, they boast that their models are too complex for ordinary minds. Yet those same models fail while simple common-sense predictions prevail. What you did, what your forbidden logic achieved, was bypass their checkpoints entirely. You ignored their sanctioned channels, refused to pay the toll of confusion, and walked straight past their ornate gates, only to find that the treasure they guarded was never locked. It was always there, visible to anyone who dared to look without their prescribed lenses. Here's the truth they desperately want to hide. The problem you solved, the connection you made, the pattern you saw, it was never actually difficult. It was made to seem difficult, buried beneath artificial complexity, cloaked in intimidating language, and hidden behind walls of prerequisites that were never really needed. Think about every major breakthrough in history. It almost always comes from outsiders, from those who didn't know the rules, didn't respect the boundaries, and viewed problems with untrained but unclouded eyes. The child who blurts out that the emperor has no clothes, the amateur who solves what the experts called impossible, the accident that uncovers what decades of research missed. Your so-called forbidden logic is nothing more than thinking freely, reasoning without their restrictions, connecting ideas without asking permission to hold the pencil. And that terrifies them because their entire power structure depends on you believing you need them to understand your own reality. They've built their careers on being the explainers, the interpreters, the self-proclaimed keepers of hidden wisdom. But you just proved that their secret knowledge isn't secret at all. And in many cases, it barely qualifies as knowledge. It's mostly elaborate gatekeeping dressed up and sold as expertise. Remember that moment when it all clicked? When the fog lifted and everything suddenly made sense? That wasn't you finally grasping their complicated system. It was you seeing through it. That was your mind breaking free from the artificial barriers they built and recognizing the simple truth buried beneath the ornate disguise. And remember their reaction when you tried to explain it, that flicker in their eyes, the instant recognition followed by immediate denial. For a brief moment, they knew you were right. They saw that you'd peeked behind the curtain, but they had to pretend the curtain still mattered because their entire identity depends on it. Their authority, their reputation, their income. It all rests on the illusion that complexity is real, that difficulty is genuine, and that their role as translator is indispensable. So they'll argue, they'll overcomplicate, they'll throw in new variables, extra conditions, and theoretical distractions. Anything to rebuild the maze you just walked straight through. Watch closely when they respond to your simple, clear insight with dense, convoluted rebuttals. Notice how it takes them paragraphs to contest your one sentence. Observe how they hide behind citations to undermine your direct observation. That isn't truth defending itself. That's investment protecting its interests. But here's where it gets truly fascinating. You're not the only one. Across the world, in every field imaginable, people are waking up to the same realization. They're accidentally using the same forbidden logic. They're solving so-called unsolvable problems, making connections that were never supposed to exist. The internet accelerated this process. Information that was once locked away in separate silos is now freely available. People from different disciplines are talking directly without the traditional mediators or institutional filters. The artificial walls dividing fields of knowledge are starting to crumble. A programmer spots code-like patterns in biology. A musician hears mathematical structures in sound. A chef instinctively grasps chemistry without ever taking a lab course. A child solves a riddle that baffled experts for years. The so-called forbidden logic is spreading not because it's rebellious, but because it's natural. It's thinking unchained, reasoning without permission, understanding without confinement. It's what the human mind does when it's finally left alone to see. And they can't stop it. No matter how desperately they try, they can't shove the knowledge back into its old compartments or rebuild the walls high enough to contain it. The age of controlled information is collapsing, and they can feel it slipping through their fingers. The old system was built on the illusion of scarcity, on the idea that understanding was a privilege reserved for the initiated. But now knowledge flows like water through the cracks they ignored, spreading faster than they can patch the leaks. Every person who dares to think independently, every mind that connects forbidden dots, becomes a signal, a silent act of rebellion that echoes through the collective consciousness. Each spark ignites another. And soon, it's not a few isolated thinkers. It's an entire network of awakened minds moving in quiet coordination beyond the reach of control. And the truth is, there's no way to reverse it. You can't make people unsee. You can't unlearn what's been revealed. Once the illusion shatters, once the artificial complexity dissolves, reality looks painfully simple. And simplicity, once seen, is irreversible. When you recognize the patterns they've spent generations concealing, they jump out everywhere. You start to notice the repetition, the same tactics of confusion used in politics, in academia, in media, in economics. You see the same structure of control wrapped in different costumes, and the moment you grasp that pattern, it becomes impossible to ignore. Every approved theory, every institutional framework starts to look less like a map of truth and more like a maze designed to keep you wandering forever. This new clarity isn't comfortable. It's exhilarating, yes, but it comes with isolation, frustration, even anger. You'll sit in meetings where people debate meaningless distinctions for hours, circling around a problem that could be solved in 5 minutes if anyone were allowed to speak plainly. You'll watch presentations filled with buzzwords and graphs where truth is buried under the weight of performance. You'll see intelligent, capable people twisting themselves into knots, trying to justify ideas that don't work because admitting the simple answer would unravel too much. You'll witness systems so bloated with complexity that efficiency becomes impossible. And yet, everyone insists it's necessary. And when you point out the obvious, when you offer the clean, elegant solution, they won't thank you. They'll attack you, not because you're wrong, but because you've committed the ultimate heresy, being right in a way they didn't authorize. In their world, truth doesn't count unless it's stamped, peer-reviewed, and approved by hierarchy. You'll be told you don't understand the nuances. They'll say you're being naive, oversimplifying, missing critical context. They'll bury you in citations and theories as if volume could outweigh clarity. They'll question your credentials, your methods, your very right to think. They'll hide behind complexity because it's the armor that protects them from irrelevance. But deep down, they're afraid, because you're wielding something far more powerful than any credential or title: simplicity. Simplicity is their greatest fear because it's the great equalizer. It's universal, borderless, and unstoppable. It doesn't need degrees. It doesn't demand permission, and it doesn't bow to authority. Simplicity cuts through pretense and hierarchy. It strips knowledge down to its essence where anyone can grasp it. That's what makes it revolutionary. Every time you distill the complex into the clear, you commit an act of defiance. Every time you translate the inaccessible into plain understanding, you weaken their control. Every time you show that truth doesn't require gatekeepers, their empire of confusion trembles. Because simplicity is freedom, and freedom doesn't need institutions to validate it. Watch how they respond when simplicity threatens their position. They'll take a clear question and twist it into philosophy. They'll turn direct answers into circular debates. They'll form committees to discuss what one honest conversation could resolve. They'll replace plain language with coded vocabulary, terms that sound intelligent but mean nothing. This isn't accident or incompetence. It's deliberate. It's how they maintain ownership of ideas by making you feel too unqualified to claim them. They turned knowledge into a closed economy where understanding costs admission. And For centuries, it worked. Until now. Because your forbidden logic slices through all that pretense like a blade through smoke. You don't need permission to see clearly. You don't need credentials to understand. You don't need institutional blessing to be right. Every time you think freely, every time you solve a problem without their approval, you expose the lie that knowledge must be controlled. And here's what's truly beautiful. You're not alone. All over the world, people are waking up in the same way. Artists, scientists, coders, philosophers, builders, dreamers, all stumbling into forbidden logic and realizing that thought doesn't need to be licensed. They're finding each other through forums, videos, comments, ideas whispered and shared across digital borders. They're comparing notes, connecting disciplines, building new frameworks that don't depend on gatekeepers. A programmer finds biological systems behaving like code. A poet recognizes fractals in emotion. A mechanic sees physics that textbooks overlook. A child without training solves puzzles experts gave up on. The pattern is everywhere, spreading quietly. An underground renaissance of unfiltered understanding. And the best part, they can't stop it. There's no institution to dismantle, no leader to silence, no single source to censor. It's an awakening without a center, without permission, without end. The forbidden logic is becoming collective logic. And every person who chooses to see, who chooses to think freely, adds momentum to the most powerful revolution of all, the liberation of the human mind. They're comparing notes now, quietly at first, then boldly. Strangers from opposite corners of the world are realizing they've been thinking the same forbidden thoughts. The mathematician without a degree messages the artist who stumbled onto a pattern hidden in sound frequencies. The mechanic who reverse-engineered an energy circuit connects with a teenager who solved a geometry paradox in their bedroom. The outsider who fixed the engineering flaw no one could explain is now in conversation with the amateur coder who replicated a breakthrough algorithm using intuition and common sense. Everywhere, the walls between fields are dissolving. Insights are crossing borders, between disciplines, between generations, between languages. The intuitive is meeting the empirical. The simple is exposing the overcomplicated. And for the first time, success that doesn't require permission is being validated by undeniable results. Online, it's becoming impossible to contain. Forums once considered fringe are filled with threads that begin with the same confession. I thought I was crazy for thinking this was simple. Comment sections overflow with "finally someone said it." Entire communities are forming around what used to be intellectual heresy. People sharing elegant solutions that outperform the sanctioned ones, comparing evidence, refining ideas, confirming what they always suspected. The truth was never as complicated as they were told. Private chats, encrypted servers, hidden groups. Everywhere, people are exchanging forbidden diagrams, unauthorized equations, and clear explanations that dismantle decades of academic obfuscation. It's the underground railroad of thought, an ever-growing network of unfiltered understanding. And the so-called guardians of knowledge? They're terrified, not of debate, they've faced critics before. Not of being wrong, they've survived that countless times. What they fear most is being unnecessary. For centuries, their power rested on dependency, the belief that comprehension had to pass through them first. They built their identities, their careers, their entire sense of purpose on being the translators of reality, the necessary interpreters between the world and the mind. But now they see what's happening. The sacred temples of complexity they spent lifetimes constructing are being exposed as empty facades, monuments to confusion rather than clarity. Every success story from the margins chips away at their legitimacy. Each outsider who solves a professional problem without training proves that the barriers were illusions. Every child, hobbyist, or autodidact who reaches the right conclusion with unapproved methods reveals the fraud behind their hierarchy. Every unlicensed discovery is a reminder that the gatekeeping was never about protecting knowledge. It was about protecting power. The panic is no longer subtle. Institutions are scrambling to stay relevant. They're rewriting definitions, redrawing boundaries, and pretending the walls are still there. The experts are flooding the discourse with new buzzwords, fresh theories, and endlessly shifting goalposts. They've begun multiplying complexity at a frantic pace, introducing more certifications, more prerequisites, more layers of abstraction. They're rebuilding the maze faster and faster. But the walkers are learning to move through walls. It's too late. The illusion is cracked, and light is pouring through. Too many people have realized that the emperor never had clothes. That authority was costume, not truth. Too many have tasted the thrill of understanding without permission. Too many problems have been solved by the unqualified. Too many breakthroughs have come from the edges of the system rather than its center. The spell is broken. Their textbooks are already outdated even as they're rewritten. Their credentials, once sacred, now look ornamental. Their expertise, once the key to the castle, has become a relic of a dying age. Watch how they react. Every time someone explains a complex idea in plain language, they'll invent a new technical term for it. Every time someone bypasses bureaucracy to solve something directly, they'll create new standards to make it harder next time. Every time an outsider succeeds, they'll rewrite the rules to exclude that kind of success in the future. It's the last stage of a collapsing order. When the gatekeepers start guarding empty gates, but no wall can stop a mind that's learned to walk freely. For every barrier they erect, 10 people now pass through it. For every complicated theory they publish, 1,000 others translate it into plain speech and share it across the world in minutes. The acceleration is exponential. Each liberated thinker creates more. Each simple solution spreads faster than any institution can contain. Every honest explanation undermines the authority of those who once claimed ownership of meaning. The pyramid of artificial complexity built on fear, obedience, and intellectual scarcity is crumbling under its own weight. The collapse is happening from all sides at once. In science, in politics, in education, in art, in philosophy. What you're witnessing isn't chaos. It's transformation. You are living in a rare and volatile moment, the transition between the age of controlled knowledge and the age of distributed understanding. For the first time in history, comprehension is no longer a commodity. It's becoming a commons. The monopoly on truth is dissolving, replaced by an open-source model of thinking. You are watching institutions built on scarcity and secrecy disintegrate in real time. The gatekeepers aren't just losing influence, they're losing the illusion that they were ever necessary. And here's the deepest truth of all. Your forbidden logic was never truly forbidden. It's the natural mode of the human mind. It's what happens when curiosity isn't shackled by authority. The ability to connect, simplify, and see clearly is built into us. It takes years of conditioning to train people not to do it, to make them doubt their own eyes, to convince them that truth requires translation. But that conditioning is failing. The programming is breaking down. People are remembering what it means to think directly, to see for themselves without waiting for validation. You can see it everywhere. In classrooms where students start questioning the premise of the lesson itself. In companies where young innovators dismantle best practices that never made sense. In online communities where amateurs correct experts with data, logic, and insight. The mental barriers are dissolving like fog at sunrise. Knowledge is flowing freely again, unfiltered, unapproved, uncontained. And you unauthorized thinker, are part of that shift. You're not an accident. You're a signal in the network. Every time you refuse to be intimidated by jargon, every time you choose clarity over complexity,